In the days of Abraham, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah stood in the plain of the Jordan, well-watered and fertile, like a garden. Their lands were rich, their markets full, and their people numerous. Yet the cities were known for their great wickedness, and their sin had become grave before the Lord. Abraham dwelt in the plains of Mamre. One day, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day, he lifted his eyes and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself to the ground. He urged them to rest, to wash their feet, and to partake of food. Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and told her to prepare fine meal and bake cakes. He ran to the herd, took a tender calf, and gave it to a young man, who prepared it quickly. He then set butter, milk, and the calf before them, and stood by as they ate. The men asked for Sarah, and Abraham said she was in the tent. One of them spoke, saying that Sarah would have a son. Sarah heard this from the tent door and laughed within herself, for she was old. The Lord spoke of her laughter, and Abraham listened. Then the men rose and looked toward Sodom. Abraham walked with them to send them on their way. The Lord spoke, saying that the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah was great, and their sin was very grievous. The men turned from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. Abraham drew near and spoke, asking if the righteous would be destroyed with the wicked. He asked if the city would be spared for 50 righteous people within it. The Lord said it would be spared for their sake. Abraham continued speaking, asking about 45, 40, 30, 20, and 10. Each time, the Lord answered that he would not destroy the city if that number of righteous people were found there. When the Lord finished speaking with Abraham, he departed, and Abraham returned to his place. 2 of the men came to Sodom in the evening. Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face toward the ground. He urged them to turn into his house, to wash their feet, and to stay the night. At first, they refused and said they would remain in the street, but Lot pressed them strongly, so they turned into him and entered his house. He prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Before they lay down, the men of the city, both young and old, all the people from every quarter, surrounded the house. They called to Lot and asked where the men were who had come to him that night. Lot went out to them, shutting the door behind him, and spoke to them. The men of the city pressed hard against Lot and came near to break the door. The 2 men inside reached out their hands, brought Lot into the house, and shut the door. They struck the men outside with blindness, both small and great, so that they became weary trying to find the door. The men then spoke to Lot, asking if he had any relatives in the city. They told him to gather them and bring them out, for the city was to be destroyed because the outcry against it had grown great before the Lord. Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, and told them to rise and leave, for the Lord would destroy the city. But he seemed to them as one who mocked. As morning approached, the angels urged Lot to hurry, to take his wife and his 2 daughters who were present, lest he be consumed in the punishment of the city. Lot lingered, and the men took hold of his hand, and the hand of his wife, and the hands of his 2 daughters, and brought them out of the city. They said to him to escape for his life, not to look behind him, and not to stay anywhere in the plain, but to escape to the mountains, lest he be destroyed. Lot spoke to the men and asked that he might not escape to the mountains, saying that the journey might overtake him with harm. He pointed to a small city nearby and asked that he might flee there instead. The men granted his request, saying that they would not overthrow that city for his sake. They told him to hurry, for they could do nothing until he arrived there. Lot entered the city as the sun rose upon the earth. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire upon Sodom and Gomorrah from the heavens. The cities of the plain were overthrown, along with all the inhabitants and what grew on the ground. As Lot and his family fled, his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Abraham rose early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain. He saw the smoke of the land rising like the smoke of a furnace. God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow. when he destroyed the cities in which Lot had dwelt. Lot departed from the small city and went to dwell in the mountains with his 2 daughters. For he was afraid to remain there. They lived in a cave. The daughters spoke among themselves, saying that there were no men left in the land to come to them according to the custom of all the earth. They made their father drink wine, and each in turn lay with him. And both became with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ammi. These events followed the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the land remained as it had been after the fire, desolate and altered. The fertile plain was no longer as before. The account of the cities remained tied to the events that had unfolded. When the 2 angels came to Sodom, when Lot received them, and when the men of the city surrounded the house, the actions of the inhabitants had led to the judgment that came upon them. And the destruction occurred swiftly after Lot was brought out. The cities, once filled with people and activity, ceased to exist as they had been. Their destruction marked the end of their presence in the plain. The smoke that Abraham saw rose continually, showing the aftermath of what had taken place. Lot's departure and survival were connected to the earlier exchange between Abraham and the Lord, when Abraham had spoken concerning the righteous within the city. The number that had been spoken of was not found there. And the outcome followed as declared. The sequence of events moved from the visit at Abraham's tent, to the journey toward Sodom, to the actions within the city, and finally to the destruction by fire. Each part unfolded in order, leading to the final state of the land. The plains that had once been compared to a well-watered garden became a place marked by what had occurred. The memory of the cities remained in the account of their destruction. The narrative of Sodom and Gomorrah stands within the larger account of Abraham's time, showing the events that took place when the Lord declared the condition of the cities and acted upon it. The destruction was complete, affecting the cities, their inhabitants, and the surrounding land. Only Lot and his daughters remained from that place, having been brought out before the fire fell. The account closes the events concerning Sodom and Gomorrah with the transformation of the land and the continuation of Lot's lineage through his daughters. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah remained part of the record of the land in the days following Abraham. The cities no longer stood, and the plain bore the marks of what had taken place. The smoke that rose after the event signified the completeness of the overthrow. Abraham continued in the land where he had been dwelling. The place where he had stood before the Lord became a point from which he had seen the outcome. The sequence that began with the visit of the 3 men had reached its conclusion in the destruction of the cities. The account preserved the order of events, the arrival of the men to Abraham, the message concerning Sarah, the declaration regarding Sodom, Abraham's words concerning the righteous, the journey of the 2 angels to Sodom, Lot's actions in receiving them, the response of the men of the city, and the removal of Lot and his family before the destruction. The actions within Sodom took place during the evening and night, followed by the urgency of departure at dawn. The destruction came after Lot had reached the small city that he had requested as a place of refuge. The fire and brimstone fell from the heavens, bringing an end to the cities and their surroundings. Lot's wife, who had been brought out with him, did not continue with him to safety, as she looked back and became a pillar of salt. Lot and his 2 daughters remained and later dwelt in the mountains. The land that had once been fertile no longer retained its former condition. The transformation was visible from a distance, as Abraham observed the rising smoke. The change in the land reflected the events that had occurred there. The account continued with Lot and his daughters in the cave, where the daughters acted to preserve their family line. The sons born from these events became the beginnings of the Moabites and the Ammonites. These outcomes followed directly from the removal of Lot from the city before its destruction. The preservation of Lot was tied to the earlier interaction between Abraham and the Lord. The narrative did not return to the cities themselves, as they had been completely overthrown. Their presence remained only in the account of what had occurred. The sequence of actions from the arrival of the visitors to the final destruction, formed a continuous record. The events demonstrated the progression from the declaration of the city's condition to the execution of judgment. The steps were recorded in detail, showing each stage as it unfolded. The plains of the Jordan, once described as fertile, were changed by the destruction. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah no longer existed in their former state, and their names became associated with the event that had taken place. The account concluded with the continuation of Abraham's life and the survival of Lot and his daughters. The destruction of the cities marked a significant moment within the broader narrative, defined by the sequence of events that led to their end. The record remains as a description of what occurred, from the initial visit at Abraham's dwelling to the final state of the land after the fire.